13 verses. Napana, Napana Kalana O K Au Ka'aha. Napana Keia O Ka'aha. Oh, you're. I can't. I'm much better at chanting than I am at just saying the words. So yes, my 13 verse dance that is so advanced, and I usually just kind of step off to the side. But as I really started working on this imposter syndrome project, I was also faced with like, okay, here are the dances. Are you ready to move to the advanced class? And at first I said no. I showed the video to my husband and son, and they laughed, like, knowing that I could never learn this dance. And now I don't say this to brag, which I shouldn't, because I'm very proud because I practice a lot. And I actually had my teacher turns back and ask me if like we're doing some of them correctly, because I know this dance. I'm learning. I'm only on verse 6, but I know them so well just from practicing and doing it. And
you're gonna put on a show. That's awesome.
Yeah. Now you gotta show your husband and son.
I don't. Oh, yeah. Well, I don't have my proper implements, and I don't have my skirt. And
she's not wearing her yoga work pants.
And technically, I would need permission from my kumu to perform outside of the halal, as Sarah. I keep looking at Sarah because she knows these. But I'm sure I would be granted permission
at one of the retreats.
I could do it.
I know, that's a great idea.
Get everyone dancing.
Yeah.
Sarah.
I like that.
I didn't really teach a simple one to everybody.
No, I like that.
Yeah. There's great research about hula for diabetes management, and it's really very much a mindfulness because you're doing two separate things. And then if you're chanting, so for this particular one, usually there's like a chant back and forth but this, we're chanting the whole thing. So we're really kind of doing 3 different things because some of it involves the foot, but mostly it's like you're doing your footwork and you're telling the story with your hands, you're doing your footwork, but they're really actually not synchronized necessarily. So it takes.
I was gonna say I feel overwhelmed thinking about it.
Very much. It takes being very mindful to learn this dance and then to like execute it. You really have to be in that state of flow.
No, they're like, I don't know what you're trying to do to that.
Okay, but we're not going to learn hula today. Good effort. I do have hula tonight, so after this, I'm going to learn verse 7.
Nice.
Verse 6 is the honu coming out of its shell. So the ancient. A turtle, the sea turtle. Yeah, so the ancient Hawaiians come to their death, and then they come back and reincarnated as the honu coming out of their shell.
Cool. I want to come back as a turtle.
I know. It's my favorite verse so far.
I only like the successful sea turtle where it makes it.
Yeah.
Because a lot of them.
As a sea turtle is pretty successful.
Yeah,
and then, like, once you've made it, you got like 150 years.
Yeah.
That's true. I don't want to live in I'll be the one that happens, but doesn't make it so.
Jane will come back as a baby turtle in her life.
Someone's got to get like eaten by birds and stuff. Have you seen that? It's not pretty.
She said she doesn't want to make it.
But I don't want to live 150 years either.
Oh, I do. That'd be cool.
Oh, in the
you have so much to see.
You were just like,
I guess that's true. You float.
You're just floating.
Like, what's his face from?
Crush.
And
Serve
the
sea turtle.
Yeah. The turtles, the honus, they just like chill.
Yeah. You could see all the things.
I've never been that.
Mistake, David. Mistake.
And I have a squirt and I have a needle sticker on my
I've never been to Hawaii.
You definitely have to.
Oh yeah, what was the last time?
So you have to watch Moana if you haven't. And
Yeah.
I
don't want to go.
all right, so should I get started?
Oh, you don't.
but I was waiting until like right at 3:15.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Like I just continue talking about Hawaii.
No, it's good. I was just texting.
I found this one.
Yeah, no, I didn't get mine either, but everyone calls me.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Like, I'm not a Mrs. or a Thompson, but thank you.
But they may have I don't want to get them in trouble.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
I'm
I'm a fucking doctor.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
She was totally serious too.
you know what my mother
This is Andrew's first time at lecture, and I was like, it's a wellness day. Trust me, you want to be here.
You know, in the future, your mail will always say, doctor,
It's all donation based.
I know.
But I know if it says where
have you ever
it
been
is.
here on Tuesday? And I was like, no, sure haven't.
Just that one.
Like Denver Health and BA, I think the majority of the time they don't work.
Yeah, Denver Health, we're happy if
We're
if
always
there's
like,
sound
we can't hear anything.
and picture. So this
So
way it's
You're
like
gonna
one
go together.
Oh, yeah.
Every single day.
So food is like so far down that priority list.
other degree that
I know.
help make it work.
I know, because it actually, it cuts off at 7 a.m. every single time, right? You guys can attest this, grand rounds.
Oh,
Cuts off at 7 a.m. You guys are looking like,
We're like,
Oh,
I don't know. I don't
know.
Yes, it does. It shuts off at 7 a.m. Except one time Kevin signed in on the email thing and it worked.
yes, so if you do it straight from the computer, it works, but if you try to do it from
But yeah.
television,
Yeah.
it won't work. It'll shut off at 7 a.m. And then it'll work for maybe 45 minutes if you sign in with an email, and then it can cut off at any time and no one knows when it's gonna happen, and then you have to re-sign it in. And then most of the time we give up.
And then sometimes the link for this works and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it doesn't have sound.
These poor guys that are in here, like, working on making sure the sound works. And it doesn't get
They have
better.
no idea.
And that's if we even
One
get
time
out.
we just saw everyone
Yeah,
eating
most of the
food.
time.
We're like,
What are they talking about?
My very first day was on a day that there was lecture, and I went straight there and waited, and then I got
Oh, yeah,
yelled
we
at
were
by
like
Alex
texting
for not
that day.
for showing up late, and I said I didn't show up late. He's like, I saw you walking in the back. And I was like, yeah, but I went to lecture like I thought I was supposed to. Nobody was there. I don't know what you want me to do.
Zoom or something.
It's
Like something that works. Yeah.
FaceTime.
Yeah. And I may have like I think this was hooked up to call in, and we may have disconnected the call in if anybody was calling in.
It's okay. We're just
Six
gonna
more.
Exactly.
All right, it doesn't work anyway. Let's start. We may have some tricklers. No one's answering my text.
Oh, well, jackpot today.
Someone needs to rescue Mike from Nora.
I know.
Mike needs help.
Nora's right here. I'm not doing it.
You're not the terrifying out of OR anesthesia that I'm talking about.
Today.
No, I'm not
I
trying
think
to
it's
like that
Rachel.
abbreviation.
Whatever.
It's not my
It's like
thing.
Kumar.
Okay.
You still got that
Hello.
day to get to eBay.
No, I sold it. No, so I got up there and I figured
Did
I was talking
Did
with,
you text him at
with
the
this
almost
guy that I
done?
went up with.
I'll text him right
I was
now.
like,
Let's see.
this is the hipster's version of begging. Like, so I walked around. Like, I was in it, please. And I sold it in the parking lot, but it was like such a silly thing.
Well, I saw your message. You were like, yeah, we should go to Amy's and for all the other mountains open. And I was about to be like, what pass do you have? And
Yeah.
you were like, because I've been really sad that it's not on Epic this year because I've gotten Epic for like 5 years.
Oh,
Now
yeah.
it's gonna get more.
Did you first of all punch that AA student in the face?
Well, you could have come. I was dangling it there.
I think I was gone that weekend. I forget what it was. I was somewhere. Or I was here.
So this is why I keep telling residents, especially CA1, not to tell that to medical students, because one, it is not true.
What is it true?
That you get out at 3 o'clock. Occasionally, it's somewhere between 3 and 5. You should is a reasonable time to expect.
My left degree is
I had to write my tongue in there.
The only time I've ever been
Ooh,
relieved for
a med
no, an
They
AA.
said that we leave at 3 o'clock and we're all super lazy.
Oh, well, you know that attitude trickled down from somewhere else.
Right.
She heard that from someone else.
Come spend some time at nice.
Who said that?
Yeah,
An
exactly.
AA student.
A now AA one of our former AA students.
He was telling me about how lazy we are that we all go home at 3 o'clock.
A former AA student, like they,
She currently works here.
like we
now.
hired that person, or
Yeah,
like
oh
they-
yeah, we hired her.
We hired her. Yeah.
That's
cool.
awesome.
I just want to make sure.
Love that.
No, I mean I tell applicants sometime between 3 and 5 is a reasonable
It's a reasonable, but.
Which is both
expectation,
accurate
but
and reasonable.
also
Unless you're
if shit's hitting the fan, you're not getting out.
Yeah.
Yeah, unless you're a stroke.
Yeah, or you.
You always get out at 5 or later.
I like to know what to
Yeah,
say.
you guys are shit
I was
shows though.
clinic at 5:45.
You guys attract all the poop.
Thanks for helping.
Yeah.
No.
Oh my God, I have to work
We're
at
not
12
going
hours.
right now. She's
I'm more of a life.
You were just
I was just.
I know.
The
My residence
Cliffies.
you did. We might have a few more now.
Yes. Yes.
They told me I wasn't as good as he was, and that I should
I
leave.
really don't believe that for a second.
We already know that they think Kinji is the best
Yeah,
resident.
Kinji
so
is resident
text me.
loyalty.
they're like, well, Kenji said.
No, Kinji was just like,
Not
he was a,
Sells already told you you're the best
Pre-op,
resident
gone.
now?
No, all the APs and cells.
What were me and Mal were doing in there? Apparently we were not doing it correctly.
You guys
we
were
did
singing
not.
them. That was the problem.
Please.
That's all they like.
We were singing,
what songs did they need?
but it was apparently.
He's like, I'll
You're
sing.
pre-op clinic?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm there tomorrow.
I know, I'm excited.
And
So-
Friday, and
so
like
Sandra,
3 days next week.
Oh, you'll be the
He's
all
the
super
mom.
stoked.
Our rotation.
The look on your face.
Mine is the chest surgery.
More than one
3
day.
to 4 days.
That's a lot.
Do you know
Yeah,
did
because
Dr. Tran call
annoying.
Cindy about that patient?
Yeah.
It's annoying.
Clinic.
I didn't
Straightforward,
want to,
diplomatic.
Fair.
And I didn't eat.
This wellness lecture started with a lot of complaining.
Remember that study that Joe told you guys about, how that makes it worse?
Yes, that it actually elevates your own, so you're all having this like cortisol release, and then the mirror neurons are activated in everybody surrounding you to like give their own release of cortisol and stress.
We were talking about a group bitch? What?
Yeah.
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 Studies show not helpful.
Studies show
Bad for you.
that we have the idea that like venting, it just feels so good afterwards, but it actually you don't, and not only do you not, but then everybody around you feels bad.
Really? Keep it
So
inside.
yeah.
Is that the solution? You have to push it further down?
No, because we don't want to suppress either.
Okay, so what do you do?
But that's
It's a whole different.
passive aggressive anger. Oh, yeah. I hear screaming at nurses just periodically really helps relieve that.
Punching bags.
I just had to do with
Yeah,
360
or
eval
a
for somebody
mindfulness
today, and it was like,
activity,
how do they
a
handle their
brief.
anger? They yell? Do they roll their eyes? And I was like, oh my god, I do that sometimes. Like, hope nobody's 360 evaling me.
So brief mindfulness activities are a good reset to bring you down and then bring everybody else around. All of their mirror neurons are playing off of what you're putting out there. So, all right, should I get
Yeah,
started?
we should start.
Okay. So,
Tony's looking into getting more people here.
okay.
I stuck him on it.
Mike didn't text me back, so he's probably having someone die in MRI or something.
That sounds about right.
No, he's probably just in the scanner.
Mike's in the scanner. Just laid down.
He's just like, this is the only way I'm getting rest. I will have an
Smiling
MRI.
solace.
I need an
Nobody
MRI.
knows where they are.
No, you know,
Nobody
you
thinks
bring
to
your
look in the
phone
scanner.
and your MRI.
Okay, so now that we've identified some potential nap areas that people won't look, today we're going to talk about overcoming imposter syndrome. And so I'm Dr. Jill Vogeley, and I suffer from imposter syndrome on a fairly regular basis. And most recently, when it came to making this very slide and putting my title as Dr. Joe Vogeley, because I'm not a real doctor, right? I'm a psychologist, and I'm in a room with real doctors. Right?
You're a real doctor.
I was going to say.
I
I think the PhD is the real doctor.
Right.
We are the
Well, that's
graduate
interesting
professional
because,
degree doctors.
yes.
You
So
know.
my 12-year-old son likes to say that I'm a scientist that studies the brain and human experience. Right? So he has a much more insightful and eloquent way of, and a much more confident way of describing his job versus me. I'm not a real doctor, you know. But where does that come from? When I put that, and so I catch myself, and having these thoughts, and I don't just let it spiral away, but I still have these as automatic thoughts sometimes. And, it can come from just the history of being a woman, being in a field that notoriously wasn't very well respected. It is coming around as we learn more about the biopsychosocial model and how we are all in this together and can work well together. But I want to ask you, is this you? I'm sorry, but your acceptance letter was sent you as a mistake. You're actually not qualified after all. I'm sorry, the job offer at Denver Health, we didn't contact the one reference and you're not qualified at all.
To my nightmare.
Yeah. You're really gonna trigger Jane.
So,
Andrew knows, he's already heard me ask
She's
me
gonna
times
need some
today, am I
ketamine.
fired yet?
all right, raise your hand if you've ever had any variation of this thought. Okay. All right, so how about this one? I'm sorry, but we reviewed your medical school performance and you aren't even qualified for this residency program. So who's ever had that thought that they're going to see an email from Dr. Oliva someday that might say, oops. Yeah, whoops. Okay. Yeah, so those are, ways of imposter syndrome. So we have these thoughts. So what is imposter syndrome? It's the feeling that you're a fraud or that you're unqualified, that you're faking it and that you're going to be found out at any moment. And more people have this than you realize, including not only your peers, but your mentors and people that are really, true experts in areas, definitely experience imposter syndrome. And the reason that we might not know about it is because the very idea of imposter syndrome is that you're afraid that people are going to figure out that you're a fraud. So you're certainly not going to expose yourself as being a fraud. And so people tend to just keep it to themselves. It's especially common in fields where your work can be seen and the outcome can be seen to the public or to other people around you. So writing, academic research, computer programming, law, and yes, even medicine. So Nora was going to share something about her experience. Do you remember what it was?
Well, I think I felt this actually. I was thinking when you were just talking about, so there was a time in medical school, actually, so I have one long time ago, and then there's times that this happens to me, just working every day, not every day, but some days. And so the recent one is sometimes when you're up presenting at M&M, which I did at Children's not that long ago, you have those moments where you're like, geez, I wonder if somebody else had been there, if there was a different attending in the room, would the case have gone as it did? And so I think that's one time that I always question, because we do work alone and we work, and so we're trying to think of everything that we can think of, and so you're kind of question those things, and then you get reinforcement that no, that wouldn't have been the case. My patient would have died no matter who was in the operating room that day, but it's hard when you stand up there in front of your peers and present cases that don't go well, because sometimes you do think, geez, if it had been Allison, the patient would have survived, So that's hard. And then one from really early on in my career do you want me to keep going or should I just stop?
Sure, no, go ahead.
All right. So early on in my career, after my first year of medical school, my mom died. And during my first year of medical school, she was quite ill. And so during that first year of med school, speaking to the one that acceptance letter really wasn't for you, I actually failed 2 classes my first year of med school. And so I had to retake them, and having never, I didn't fail anything in my life until I hit med school, which I'm sure many of you are in the same position. Until you get to a certain point, you eventually fail. I mean, we all do, and it was a learning experience at the time. But yeah, so it was definitely, I had to struggle through medical school to be like, oh, do I really belong here after, these two, like, how do I survive this? And I did.
Yeah.
I'm here to talk about it.
So, as you can see, it's something that can occur, probably has occurred for most of you. Research shows at least 80%, and then the other 20% are probably, a good percentage of them are just not sharing it. And it's likely to occur again, right? So, but the good news is that there are things that you can do to help manage. But first, let's talk about the types of imposter syndrome. So this is not an exhaustive list, but it's just something that might help you identify so that you can better target. So there's the perfectionist, and this is the primary focus on how things are done and how things turn out. And so even a minor flaw is unacceptable. So you could have produced the greatest work and only 99 out of 100% of it was accurate, and it's considered, or you consider it yourself, that it was a complete failure. And that, creates a lot of shame. So then we have the expert, and the expert is the knowledge version of the perfectionist, and they have to know the what and the how much of what you can do, and you expect that you know everything, and that asking questions or asking for questions or feedback is a sign of weakness, and that would cause a lot of shame if you did that. Okay. So you can see how that sense of failure could be problematic. Right. So we have the soloist, and that's about the who did it, that you rely on yourself, that if you don't get it done yourself, then the project is a failure. If you have to ask for help or assistance, or even delegating work, then that's a sign that you're not capable of getting the job done. And once again, if you do have to reach out, that is a sign of failure, and that evokes shame. We have the natural genius, and they care about the how and when accomplishments happen. But for the natural genius, it's about the ease of success, and they measure themselves. So this is especially difficult for people who have always traditionally done really well with minimal studying, or pick up on things and can just do things really well their first try, so that if they ever are faced with something and they struggle with it, it's just a sign that you are a failure because you are not a natural genius and did not just pick this up automatically and immediately know how to do it correctly. Once again, evoking shame. And then we have the Superman, Superwoman. Oh, this is supposed to say Superwoman. Sorry.
We got Superman, man.
Superwoman. I'm crushed. My perfectionist just kicked in. Did you all see that happen? But I caught myself. All right, so the Superwoman, Superman, Super Resident, measures their competence on how many and how many roles they can juggle and excel in. And failure in any one of those roles, or not actually anything less than excelling in a role, is considered failure in that role and an overall failure of who you are. And you really should be able to do everything perfectly. You should be a resident and a partner and a family member, as well as, volunteer and be athletic and be the best skier. Yes, all of those things. So those are the general types of imposter syndrome. kind of resonate with anybody in here of how they do. So just, keep your eye out for when you see those actions or those thoughts that those situations rise up in yourself. For now, I want to just read a few quotes, and we're going to play Guess Who Said This. My research experience prior to starting my MD, PhD program paled in comparison to my classmates, and I felt inadequate in numerous situations. I struggled in my core graduate school coursework, which furthered my sense that I did not belong and that I was not cut out to be a scientist.
Tony.
Oh, is that you? It is Tony. Yeah. Anyone surprised by that? He's pretty forthcoming about this, but yeah, some people. All right, here's one. I was buying a house with my husband after fellowship, and my salary was slightly more than his. The lawyer kept insisting that it would be easier to just use my husband's information on the mortgage. When I asked why, he said, because you're a stay-at-home mom with no income. Anybody want to guess? Oh, Dr. Todorovich.
That's awesome.
So that went over well, right?
I would have fired him.
Yeah.
Yes, you're fired.
Possibly that happened. I don't know.
See you later.
Yes. So, it can happen to the best of us. And sometimes it's an internal experience, but sometimes it is things that are said to us and situations that are said to us in our surroundings that can really evoke these feelings of imposter syndrome. So what causes imposter syndrome? Well, part of it is that your work and your outcome is on public display, and that other people can judge you for how well you did or did not do. So it's really just being very vulnerable and open to criticism from anybody. And the thing is that we usually only when we look at other people who nobody else has imposter syndrome kind of when you're going through it. So everybody else is great. And we see those published papers, and we see that they just had job offers, and we see that they just got a fellowship at their dream location. And when we see those things, what we're not remembering is the hours spent in CTICU, the hours spent in medical school, all those things that they worked for, same as you did, along the way to get to where they are. And so there's a quote by Garrison Keillor. Does everybody know who did that radio show? I don't know, was it NPR?
Prairie Home Companion.
Prairie Home Companion, yes, thank you. So he said,
women are strong, women are good looking, and the children are all above average.
Yes, yes, which is actually such a great, because it takes away that stereotype, because the men are good looking.
Gee, you're like 2 years older than me.
The women are strong, yes. So Garrison Keillor said, we see ourselves from backstage and everyone else from third row center. And that's usually how we view our lives, especially when we're comparing. We know what's going on backstage. We saw the props fall over as everybody struggled to get it on to the stage correctly. But we only view everybody else from that third row where everything got out on stage correctly, or somebody maybe made a misstep in their dance routine, but you don't know the dance routine, so you don't know that they made the misstep. So. All right, so what can we do about this? So with imposter syndrome, the feelings that you have unearned success, or that you are not qualified, they don't go away if you accomplish more. So a lot of times we have the sense if I just keep doing this or work harder and put in extra hours, then I'll just, get rid of this. And that's actually, it doesn't help, because you're just going to keep judging your future successes as being inadequate, but more so, you're less likely to pursue opportunities that are going to expose your false self, your inadequate self even further. You're less likely to go for job interviews, to ask for salary raises, or even to ask for help to get us to the next stage in your career or elsewhere in life. And you can also just overextend yourself in this constant battle to prove your worth when you're really proving it to nobody but yourself. So along with this sabotage, the self-sabotage, we have less satisfaction in our lives. We waste time over preparing and worrying instead of having fun or learning from the process. You're less effective as a colleague because you're just not cognitively or emotionally available to your team. You're going to ask. The research shows that you ask for less money if you go into a job with imposter syndrome. You don't ask for challenges, and you won't ask for promotions within work if you have this imposter syndrome. So, but actually, most importantly, is that you can really easily lose sight of your values in life. And so, we want to do some activities with you to kind of help change that. Our first activity is called Take a Compliment. And so I want to pass these sticky notes around, and I want everybody to write 2 to 3 compliments, one about yourself, and one about something that you like in another, a value or something that you'd like to see in another person. So write it as if you're giving a person a compliment. So just write 2 to 3 compliments.
Does anyone need more?
And when you're done with your compliment, I don't know if we'll stick to this well. So come up and just put your sticky notes on this table. We'll check them out.
So we're writing one to ourselves and one to.
One compliment about yourself.
Specifically to someone else, or just?
Not specifically, just in general. Yeah, general. Don't put like.
Is that a compliment that my hair is super purple? That's an observation.
Oh yes, I wanted you guys to do that.
On the different stages? Do we keep it in third person? Like, do we write
You,
I?
yeah. So, you write you.
For
Yeah.
both of them?
Yeah. Sorry. Oh,
So we put one up.
if you already did I, that's fine. So, and when you're done, just bring your compliments up here and put them on the table.
Here, write yourself a compliment, and then write a compliment about someone else.
And not specific, just a general
No, just in
compliment.
general, like a compliment you give to someone.
I don't.
You don't like anyone here, I know. I know.
If you didn't go to Harvard, if you didn't go to Harvard, he doesn't like you.
Oh, okay, yeah. No problem.
You're pretty good at compliments. Why are you struggling with this? This is very confusing to me. You give compliments all the time and you do a very good job of it.
Oh, thanks, Jane.
You're good at compliments. You're good at giving compliments. Could be.
I'm good at
Can we
you
go
are
back
good
to
at giving compliments.
Not allowed. Don't get too comfortable in your seats.
You didn't tell me how old you are.
Yeah, you asked. I remember because you're like, I've had enough to drink. I can ask you how old you are.
Really?
That's what you said.
at least one temp, because I remember my kid was with me.
You had one great And he
Swear
ate,
don't drive
he
drunk.
ate a green taco. He ate some lettuce.
He actually still asked for green tacos.
Oh, serrano ham is like the bestest.
What makes
Iberico is better, but it's the more affordable, delicious, amazing ham from Spain.
so confused.
It's
It's affordable ham?
It's more affordable than the Iberico ham.
Oh.
It's not in comparison. It is
All right, does
very
everybody have their compliments?
dry, cured Spanish ham.
Everybody have their compliments up here?
It's delicious.
All right, so now I want everybody to come up and pick 2 compliments that resonate with you, but not your own.
Okay, go.
Ready?
Are these like to you if you're the last one?
Better get there first.
Resonates with you or something that you don't necessarily have to believe it, but it resonates with you.
Are these things we would want people to do?
Yeah, it could be, yeah.
Oh, so it would be what you.
So just pick 2.
It's not true, but I like it. I want it to be true.
Okay, so then take it. That's, yeah, absolutely.
You are not bad looking. I want it to be true.
Take 2, right?
Yeah, I think so.
You take extra compliments, Dad.
It's like not that low.
She did put 3 up there.
Oh, I put 3. I put 3. Oh, so you can acquire 3.
I mean, those resonate. My compliment really does not say
Jane,
I grew up to
I like that one. Yeah. You have so much
Yeah.
Where you going?
I was sitting next to Dr. True. And
I
I forget what my other extras. And he's like, so what's up we going? And I was like,
Who doesn't have? Does everyone have?
And he's like,
The purpose of this exercise. All right. So we're going to break out, and I want everybody to spread out. So break out in groups of 2, no more than 3. And what you're going to each do is hold one of your compliments up, and one person and the other person or is going to say that compliment to you as if they're giving you that compliment, and the only thing that you can say back is thank you.
exponentially.
So there's no qualifying statements of like, thank you, but yes, I really was dependent on everybody else to do this. This is, because that's a common thing to do with imposter syndrome, is to take a compliment and then deflect the compliment, okay? So the only response you're allowed to say is thank you, okay? And so then you're each just going to hold up, and then everybody's going to go around, have turns, and say the compliment that you're holding up to the other person. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. All right, so spread out. No more than 3 in a group. Do 2 to 3.
Are you ready? Yes, give me a speaker.
if she wanted us to spread out, I don't know if I can.
It's actually really hard to do. Come on, later. In fact, I can even send this to you.
You haven't had a whole amount. Thank you. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And
Wrong.
Wrong.
I didn't say that slow, but I was like, which is strong. Oh, thank you.
Did you already read yours? What are you doing? You're just listening.
Oh, where else was yours?
Yeah, you should each be receiving 2 compliments.
You have a nice smile.
You did say thank you. So remember, you don't want to disqualify, you don't want to discount the compliment, just a sincere thank you.
You are fun to be around. That's great. You like it?
You are always a good friend and listener when a fellow resident needs you. Very sweet. Sorry, I yawned.
Doesn't it feel
You go
good?
all green.
Did you mean it?
I've been waiting for you to say that. I'll say it.
I didn't want to be so
Like,
You have nice eyes.
you're right.
I work on my socks.
Me too.
I do too. Oh my god, I love those.
I can't see it. Self-indulgent.
That is true. Has everybody received their 2 compliments? Yes. And said thank you 2 times? Okay. So.
I don't know about these 2 up front. They look like they're
Yes, okay.
We each gave each other compliments about patience. It was pretty funny.
Yeah. We're very patient up here.
You guys look like you're like texting or something.
That's right.
And I'm going to see.
They only hire us, and we can be really patient, especially like when you're viewing something. We just
Let's see how well you did. You're super smart.
Thank you.
the hard one.
All right. You're smart, funny, beautiful, kind, a good dancer, excellent sports player, and you can read good.
Oh. I can read good.
You didn't write well.
But you can't use English well,
You did good.
Yeah.
Your
epidural technique is excellent.
That is not actually true.
Wait, I missed one word.
Your epidural technique is excellent.
That was.
I love that. That was probably true. Pick one of the.
He's like, I placed none.
Dr. Brainerd just called us old, by the way. She pointed
All
out
right.
we are the old one.
I'm going to get somebody hiding in the corner. You're an excellent physician.
Thank you.
Zero.
You were talking
Okay, so how was that for everybody? And what did you notice?
Salvi's qualifier is always I went to Harvard.
What did you all notice?
There's a lot of giggling.
Yeah. The uncomfortable laughter?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So why is it so uncomfortable to receive a compliment?
It's only deserving of criticism.
It's funny because it's true.
Right? Yeah. Maybe it's possible that you're deserving of compliments and constructive feedback, aka criticism.
It kind of feels like you're just you're expected to do a good job. So like, you expect to be criticized, but then just like doing your job and doing it well is just the baseline of what you're supposed to do. So being like complimented for it, feels kind of out of place, maybe, or undeserved because you're just doing like what everybody else is doing and you're doing like what we're supposed to do. So
yeah,
you're supposed
but
to
isn't
do
that
your
a
job.
good job?
Right, but it's like,
And it's just, it's a simple compliment, a recognition that you're here, you're present, and you're doing this. It's a big thing that you're all doing. So, who found it difficult to just say thank you and not silently qualify why you did not deserve the compliment? Yeah. And so that takes practice, but I encourage you to really practice this. When you get compliments, to just simply say thank you and put the period there. If you have that internal dialogue, just let it stay internal. Because what happens if, all right, somebody give me a compliment. Yes.
Your epidural technique is.
Thank you, but actually I just have somebody else come and do it for me. I just watch a YouTube video while I'm doing it under. Yeah.
What's wrong with
Which is
it?
truly right. But what did that do as you giving me a compliment?
It made it seem like this lovely observation that I had about you that I wanted to share with you was completely minimized and ignored.
It negated. Like if somebody feels so compelled to just like give you a simple compliment, right? Big or little, even if they felt so compelled, it means something to them to share that with you. So you don't want to negate that experience for yourself or for that other person. So that is the reason to go with compliments.
One of the things because I have a hard time taking compliments as does everyone else, but what I try to teach my daughter at least, and try to do myself, is to say, thank you, that felt really good, or I really appreciated that. Like giving that person that compliment back makes it, for some reason, a little easier for me. I don't know if that's universal or not, but for our own experience in my house, that makes it a little easier. So. And it makes the other person feel good.
Yeah. All right. And most of you here probably got into medicine so that you can help other people, and if you could make other people feel good, feel positive, that is something that you value. So we are going to move on to a values exercise. So I'm going to have everybody take one of these and pass up any extras. And I'm actually going to make you guys do this. Values exercise. The men are on that word. Yeah. All right. So and then everybody take this second sheet as well. But we're just going to focus on the first for now. And are there extra values? Yeah.
Jane, do you have a pen I can borrow?
List of values.
Okay. It's on the lecture.
Okay. So step one of this. I want you to think about times in your life. Oh, so this is a values writing exercise. And this exercise was shown to successfully help the neurophysiology undergraduates at the University of Colorado Boulder. So it's actually used internationally, but this study was initially done at CU Boulder. And so it's a values writing exercise. And the first step is to think about a time in your life when you were really happy or proud. And then jot down some of those values that come to mind when you think about that time, or think about a few times, and just put a check mark or circle, however you want to identify some of those values that you experienced during that time. Okay, so before we go on to part 2, I actually want to backstep because I forgot something I wanted to mention about the compliments. So we have a few leftovers. Anybody's welcome to come and take those home with them or to give them to somebody else. But I encourage you to take compliments people might give you, especially if they're written, if they're in an email, and keep a folder of them, or even have sticky notes that if somebody gave you a compliment, and keep those. And before you have things like fellowship interviews or job interviews or anything big in life that is feeling intimidating and you might feel that imposter syndrome coming on, go back and read those compliments and that people have given you throughout your life, and realize that they're judging you from the 3rd row where everything is perfect, and that is where it's coming from. So they're seeing the outcome where it might be difficult for you. All right, back to values. So now I want you to take part 2 of the exercise. So I just want you to pick one of those values and write a couple of sentences about why that value is important to you. Okay, the next part for exercise 3, want you to rate this statement. In general, I try to live up to these values, thinking about the values that you identified on the other page. And it's not how much you believe that you're living up to these values or how your goals are aligned. It's that you try to live up to those values. So rate that on 1 is disagree, 5 agree. And now I want you to think about the last topic somebody asked you for advice on. And just write a few sentences about what that was. Describe what somebody asked you for advice on. And then write how that might align with the value that you either chose for exercise 2 or one of the other values that you identified on your list. Okay. Is anyone willing to share maybe a value that they chose and maybe a time that they were asked for advice and how that lines up with a value they have?
I chose control, which kind of surprised me, but I think it's because as a resident, I feel like you're much in control. I feel like, at least I feel like I'm just kind of along for the ride. And so I wouldn't, like probably before residency, I wouldn't have said that was something that was important to me, but I think now that I feel a sense of loss of that, I do realize that it's important.
That is something that you value. So that's very interesting because there's also studies that show when people identify values and they choose ones, I have this even written down, so I'm not making this up, that when they choose the values such as ambition, intellectual status, or power and authority, and those types of words, that it can actually make them feel bad for having that as a value. But that's actually, it's not a bad thing to value these things. It can be the driving force towards your goals, and that's what values always should be, is kind of that compass that aligns with the goals and your behaviors. So, yeah.
One of mine was persistence.
Uh-huh.
I feel like thinking back to those times that I was proudest through my life, it was every time that there was some sort of obstacle that clearly could have like just derailed where I was headed. But just like kind of keeping your nose to the grindstone and focused on that, and then you get to that like pinnacle or wherever it is, whether graduation or whatever. Looking back and reflecting on it, that's where I saw that's where I took the most pride from that. Where I look back and say that could have wrecked it, but just kept going.
And that brings up a good point too, because a lot of times our successes and things are much in the hindsight, right? So we don't appreciate persistence when we're in the moment of persistence. We appreciate persistence after we've had an outcome and that terrible thing we had to persist through is gone. And so that's why doing this exercise, not just now, but on a regular basis, especially before big transitions, big job interviews, big things going on in life, it's good to come back to a values-based exercise to just get you back on track as to, okay, I may not be feeling this now, but I know it's something that I value and that I have overcome, helps me to overcome obstacles by sticking with my value of persistence. So, oh yeah, did you? Oh, okay. We don't need to move on. We continue. So, like I said, this study was done as part of just looking at values-based writing activity, and it showed that, especially when faced with stereotype threat, that individuals who took place in the values-based activity not only performed at the same level as their peers, but performed better at their peers. And I was actually a research assistant on a part of this study, and I had to go and kind of evoke stereotype threat. So we would have people come in to take math tests, very high achieving, so we knew to be eligible, they didn't know this, but their GPA had to be at a certain level. And then for the women, I would have to say, okay, so we're going to have you do this math test. Don't worry if it's hard for you. Like, we know that, sometimes it's difficult to finish. And so there was the control group. And so we had different parameters of who we would invoke this stereotype. That was awful, but I mean, it's really interesting research that comes out of it. So, but what they found is that even then they added this values writing component, and even when stereotype threat was evoked in a participant, they were in that group, if they took place in the values writing exercise, it did not impact their math test score, whereas it did if they did not have the values based. So.
Pass these out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Oh yeah. And do you guys still have like board exams?
Yes.
Yeah. And I have extra copies. You can always come see me. I can email you copies.
Yeah, if you could just send that out like around.
I'll just make wallpaper somewhere out of this. But yeah, and I'm happy to send out the Word documents of these that just keep them around and do it because it's a great thing to do. And sometimes just as a reset in life, that you need to be reminded that you have, yes.
Do you have to write them down, or can you have a discussion? Like, what are the?
So the study was done in writing, and I'll have to get back to you on that, but I think that the writing was important. Because if it's just conversation, you're more like honest, like it's like your secret diary that you could write down, whereas you don't want to brag about things, right? And you'll see me catching myself all the time. I'm not bragging, but I did this thing. And that is just something I'm working on in myself. And I would imagine, but I'll get back to you, but I think there's more value. I wouldn't say there's no value in doing it without writing. So, as we saw with Dr. Todorovich and her statement, sometimes we have things that are internal, but sometimes it's things that are put out to us, from the outside world. So this values-based exercise can be good in just really kind of resetting and reframing of, okay, you have this comment or you have this perception, but this is actually not a realistic perception, and here's why. Which is going to lead us to our next exercise, which is combating negative thoughts. So, am I worthless? With a question mark? Let's kind of answer that question. So, I am going to hand these out here. And so these are thought records, and they're traditionally used in cognitive behavior therapy. And it's a way to help take a thought that you experience and really challenge the authenticity of that thought, and come up with an alternative thought. So for this exercise, I want you to think of 1 or 2 times and just fill out this. So I'll start to give you the example. So as I mentioned with the first slide that I had to write Dr. Joe Vogel. Well, I didn't have to, but I chose to, right? So where was I? I was in my office. What emotion was I feeling? I was feeling inadequacy. And yeah, I guess that's an emotion. My negative automatic thought, as I said, was you're not a real doctor, right? The evidence that supports that thought. My mother would tell you I'm not a real doctor, right? She's 86, so, but there's probably, I bet, some surgeons in this hospital that would say I'm not a real doctor. Some surgeons might think that you're not as real of a doctor as they are, right? Not picking on surgeons, but I am. All right, so.
You're in the anesthesia department.
Yeah,
we like
All right, so what's the evidence that supports this? People have told me I'm not a real doctor. The evidence that does not support this, well, I could come up with a lot. But one of the biggest pieces of evidence was some of you have said, you are a real doctor, right? And so what's the alternative thought? I'm not a medical doctor, but I'm a doctor of philosophy and clinical health psychology. That is just, very neutral alternative thoughts. So alternative thoughts don't have to be like positive, like you're the best doctor, or it could be my son. I'm a scientist that studies the brain and the human experience. And so what is the emotion and feeling that I have after that? I feel a sense of pride, right? And accomplishment, because I've worked hard to get to. So I want you to fill out 1 or 2 on your thought record, and just fill out each one of these areas. And keep it really, maybe a time like you were feeling imposter syndrome, which
Are all the guys in here right now writing about being mistaken for a nurse? Does that happen?
Yeah.
Oh, that doesn't happen to you?
Yeah, that is probably a common experience. Is anybody struggling to come up with an alternative thought? We can help. Go ahead. Okay, so thought records are a really great thing because they really help you to just tease apart what's going on and help you to view it in a different way. And with imposter syndrome, we just habitually have automatic thoughts that either negate compliments or accomplishments we have, and it really is just a habit. So a good way to reverse that habit is by keeping a thought record of your own. I also have more of these for anybody that wants, and just kind of laying it out, especially if you find that you're struggling or you're going into a situation that is going to that you're feeling that sense of imposter syndrome really brewing. Think about a thought record as well to help detail out. So who is willing to share something that they may have had and like an alternative thought that they were able to come up with?
Thank you. You are also.
Oh, do we need some compliments from people?
Yeah, I gave them each a compliment.
Oh, and how did they respond?
Rose just ignored me. It was very nice.
Okay. So for those that are new, the compliment, the response is just thank you. Nothing else. Just thank you. Yeah.
So we're supposed to share
You don't have to, but
what we had as our imposter syndrome and the alternative thought.
yeah, if you're willing to share.
Sure, my imposter syndrome was easy. My first day of children's.
Yeah.
Oh God.
And it was like looking back, it was a straightforward case. And it was like, I've been doing medical training for 6 years and I have no idea what to do right now. And yeah. They're just tiny adults. So I guess the alternative thought to channel my inner Dr. Chandler. That another opportunity to excel.
Yes, that is a great, instead of you're going to fail, you don't know what you're doing, you're going to fail. This is another opportunity to learn. I'll change. Instead of excel, learn. Another opportunity to learn. So that's just, a good example of how to neutralize those thoughts. So with cognitive behavior therapy and the thought record, it's really about challenging thoughts, right? But sometimes challenging the thought may not be the best approach. So another way to think about it is accepting thoughts. And one of the reasons that accepting, the idea of accepting a thought is a good idea is because it may be partially true, right? Or fully true, but there may be parts of it that are true. So you want to think about maybe shifting the thoughts. So instead of I'm not good enough, it could be I'm not as good as somebody that has experience in this area, right? So it's not necessarily challenging the thought, it's just more adapting it and accepting that I'm not good enough at doing epidurals right now, and that's okay, right?
I had someone tell me once that one of the ways you can be mindful about how these thoughts are kind of circulating is that sometimes when you challenge the thought, then you're also judging yourself, right? So that can create inner frustration.
Exactly.
So instead what you can say is, what else could be true? And you can keep going along that line, like, okay, yes, I think that I suck. Well, what else could be true? Maybe I suck a little bit at this thing, but I'm also good at these things.
Yeah.
What else could be true? I've never done this before, so why should I be good at it? What else could be true? And you keep going.
Yeah. So, and that's excellent. The only thing I would change is that I may not be good at this, and I'm good at this, because I don't like that statements. That's just language that I help train people to change, and someday I'll learn to do it myself. But, shifting thoughts is, a good accepting approach. So it's also, like comparison thoughts and imposter syndrome. And so it's really kind of you're ranking yourself against other people. And ultimately, like somebody may be the best at doing epidurals in this room. But does that mean that everybody else like sucks at doing epidurals? I mean, probably not, right? There's probably somebody that's better at it than you, or if that's like your total forte and you are the epidural person that everybody runs to, then there's probably something else that other people are better at or find an easier time doing. So it's not so much about like the ranking that because you're not as good as somebody else doesn't mean that you're bad at it. And so I want to ask the question, what would happen if you accepted the fact that you probably aren't the best resident in the program?
It's pretty freeing. My associate program director, my intern year, she's like stood up in front of all of us at the beginning of the year and she was like, I'm average. She was like, most of you are average. And that is okay. She was like, you're an average doctor. Like, you've made it this far. That's excellent. Like, she's like, not everybody can be the best. And she's like, I know medical school has like trained you to feel like if you didn't get honors and everything that you were never going to match or succeed or do anything in life. And she's just like, it's perfectly fine to be average. And it was kind of nice to just like take the like expectation away that it was like, oh, okay, she's average, I'm average. Like, that's cool. Like,
and the reality is, for those of you that are into statistics, that we know that 64% of you are average, right? The majority of you are average. And 13% of you are excelling, right? And 13% are
less than excelling.
15% of you are below average.
That doesn't mean you're bad.
But that's just in life. So, but the point is, like, most of you are average. But, like, all right, so let's say, like, that you just had this statement. What would happen if you accepted the fact that you are not the best resident in this program? Nothing? You'll be fine. It is kind of liberating to just really accept that. Oh, okay. Great. That battle's over. Right? All right, so other things you can do as far as acceptance goes is adopting a growth mindset. And so it's not about being the best. A growth mindset is about becoming better. It's about recognizing your strengths and areas where you need to reach out so that you can continue to grow, and use your strengths to grow. Use your strengths to help other people grow. It's really just like focusing on becoming better and not becoming the best, and realizing that goalpost can keep going further. So just forget about the goalpost and just continue to become better. Another good growth mindset, as well as acceptance, is the idea of feel the fear and do it anyway, right? That you can have imposter syndrome thoughts and feelings, but you can still do it anyway. You don't have to let those thoughts and feelings, you don't have to obey those thoughts and feelings. You're not mandated to obey every thought that you have. Another good thing about a way to approach imposter syndrome is to befriend the fraud police. And this gets into the Dunning-Kruger effect. So who knows about the Dunning-Kruger effect?
Isn't that where you think you're better than you actually are?
Yes, so we all have this to a degree, right? Some people more than others. It's more about being aware of this, that you think that you're better, that your confidence level is higher than it actually is. And then over time and with experience, you realize like, oh goodness, I actually am not. So we have here like, look around, behold my masterpiece. Seriously, stick figures, right? And then we hear delusion has reached new heights, and they're laughing. This guy here who actually has expertise and confidence, incompetent fool, that one, right? So don't be the incompetent fool. And embrace those imposter syndrome feelings. Instead of trying to push them away, embrace them and realize that it's helping you to recognize like, oh, I can reach out, that I don't know everything, right? And that's okay, because you don't want to be the one that never questions your abilities, that you have no insight at all. It just won't get you very far in life, or it may, but people just won't like working with you or being around you. So go back to your values and see how that aligns with all of that. So what can you do during residency and throughout your lives, but in residency? Be encouraging, give compliments to each other, and then save those compliments for future use. Share your own failures, and that can be a very vulnerable thing to do, but especially amongst your own group that you have spent these years developing a really safe network. And if you have mentors that you can share this with, even better, to share your failures, because it lets other people know that not only can you gain insight and knowledge and growth from that, but it also lets other people know that not everybody is a success 100% of the time. Just have a positive and kind community where you're not judging each other, talking behind each other's backs when somebody does maybe have a failure or is struggling in an area. Just catch yourself with that. And make mentoring a first-class activity. So that's like receiving mentorship and receiving feedback, as well as giving it. And you're in such a great opportunity right now to see all different styles of mentorship and all different styles of feedback. Use this, see what works for you, and practice that on other people so that you, moving forward into your careers, can be that mentor that everybody wants to have. That mentor that everybody, 10 years from now when I have residents, and you're the person that comes to mind when they say, that's who I'm thinking of in this. So I would like to acknowledge that this presentation, I did some pretty significant adaptations, but it originally came from the ADA initiative, which is an initiative for women in technology, and they do imposter syndrome workshops, and they very graciously offered for free these resources, as well as many other resources that can be used. So incredible organization that is working to foster strength in women in tech and not trying to hoard their information. So go ADA initiative.
And along Joe's lines, Allison and I were just at a well-being conference in DC, and one talk that we went to was by a psychologist, and she actually gives out these little cards that says you're awesome, and then on the back it says like all these words, and you can pass them around to each other. So I grabbed 3 of them while I was at the conference, so I'm going to pass them to 3 of you, and then you can pass them amongst each other, because some days you just need to be told that you're awesome. Like the first day you come to Children's, you probably need to be told that you're awesome. Who else needs one of these?